Click the links to support channel becoming a member here over at subscribe. So I got a mailbox. Want to mail me some comics. So comic book shop behind Free Comic Book Day is shutting down. Here's the thing. Maybe these guys are the nicest guys in the world. Maybe they're just total, unbelievably soy pussies. Which, if they're working in comics is probably the case. And is there any self-awareness with any of these kind of people? At some point, do they look around and go, "Yeah, these America Chavez comics, or these Riri Williams, or this is not really not quite the comics I remember as a kid. They're just good, simple, fun stories." And they look at you like, if you're on the left, you'd never say something like that, because then they would know, like, yikes, my guy, bad. They would give you a gentle, passive-aggressive signal that you're getting off the plantation a little bit. Yikes, my guy. Bad take, friendo. And it's problematic. It's all this passive-aggressive BS instead of just having an honest conversation. They have to have these threats. They don't argue the argument. They argue around the argument because they don't really have an argument to it. It's like, what do you say? It's like, oh, yeah, the comics aren't selling. That's objective. Everything beyond that ranges into subjective territory. And the thing is, most of these people don't want to have an honest discussion about this kind of stuff. They can never admit why comics are not selling, because they think that anyone who disagrees with them are Hugo Boss, because most of them are children in adult bodies. It's the participation trophy generation that taught what to think and not how to think. And the idea of trying to get in your opponent's mind and think about things from their perspective, they would never try to do that because they've been brainwashed to think, well, everyone who's against us is an existential threat and we're correct. We're the commies and they're the Hugo Boss, and we just happen to have the right opinion on every single thing. So it's celebrating its 35th anniversary and is talking about shutting down, which means it's going to happen because nothing is going to change to turn comics around. They don't want to turn comics around. I mean, I'm sure there are some interviews with some people in the industry who they went to some meeting, and some of these comic book shop owners were telling people what was wrong with the industry, and then like BuzzFeed or Kotaku or what was it, Bleeding Cool reported on it, and they said they quoted these people out of context. They said the word black, and like, seriously, that I'm not. And you hear that and you're like, but they portrayed it as if somehow that's a negative or pejorative, because I presume they were talking about characters that didn't sell, which is very much true. Black characters are not going to sell as well as other characters because the demographics of the country don't support that. But they don't report that when Bleeding Cool reported on that. This is years ago. They didn't report on anything substantive. They just reported on trying to portray these comic book people in a negative light, saying things like, yeah, these woke female SJW characters are not selling. You're just repeating back what the guy who owns a comic book shop is saying. Like, he's giving you his business acumen, and it's like that. It's just like they don't care. Ultimately, they just don't care. The woke mind virus, yeah, it's a pretty good way to look at it. So anyway, obviously in this corner of the web, we say that comics got woke, which is true, and the left will say there are other factors, which, I was starting to go down that path, and I thought, wait a minute, manga is selling pretty well. So would you like to solve that puzzle? How it's just manga's just kept taking market share as soon as it hit the market, it immediately started taking market share. Because it's not woke. I mean, some of them are woke, but there's so much out there that there's some of the stuff that just tells a fun, simple story. Why didn't American comics do that? Because, again, they don't care. So what happened? Comics were always a little bit left-wing. The mainstream ones, for sure, but they were written by normal people. Somewhere in the last 20 years, these writers got replaced with activists who think there is only one perspective on anything, their far left toxic perspective, where they can't portray a balanced approach to a story because they have to follow the rules of Bolshevism. So if they need a gang in a story, they have to be a blonde biker gang. Except that every comic does that, and people start to notice. There was a comic that had two blonde guys who tried to hijack a plane. They were wearing like balaclavas and gloves and stuff, so you couldn't see they're kind of hiding the skin tone, but underneath the beanies, the blonde hair was peeking out, and they were trying to hijack a plane, and some POC character had to stop the blonde guys. They're probably two Germans, right? just like that movie, Die Hard. Yeah, the Germans are trying to commit large-scale Malamute events. That's insane. So you're seeing what happens with movies and comics. It's the same thing. You're seeing this statistical anomaly, but it pops up every single time. When you're young, you're not going to notice it in comics, but it's programming their minds to hate people of European descent, and it's unwarranted. They always show them as a negative, portrayed in a negative manner, but it's so heavy-handed that they just don't read the comics. People just keep dropping out of comics, and they don't get a new audience in there. You got to be introduced to comics. A parent or a friend has got to get you one. You got to see it on the shelf, and it's got to be worth it to you. But a parent is not going to give their kids something that is so anti-European, not if they're of European extract. And the Latin and black kids don't read comics that much anyway. So, I mean, not enough to sustain an industry. So the comic industry alienated most of its audience base. They're trying to chase an audience that's not there. And they think, okay, well, we'll get rid of the old audience, and then we'll get in this new female pox BLT audience. Never materialized, and they just kept chasing it instead of turning things around. If you're selling comics mostly to the people of the light, the blonde and red-haired people, you can't overrepresent them as the antagonists. Why would they want to read their tribe portrayed negatively? So if you honestly tell them this, that the gangs or assorted bad guys have to be accurate to what people know is true, they view that as just like, oh, that's hatred. That's just hatred. Like, no, if you overrepresent a group of people who are not committing these acts, that's hatred. And they really don't understand that. And the thing is, they don't even want to have the conversation. It's not hate to show antagonists accurately represented in comics. It's hatred to do the opposite, to overrepresent European people in negative roles. But even if the writers and artists wanted to get comics with like a ghetto gang in the story, the company obviously wouldn't let them. And those kind of people just wouldn't be hired in the first place. Woke people, God, what was Mark Waid and Kwanzaa's comic? Ignited. I think it went eight issues or something. And after like 6 issues, the thing was selling like a few thousand copies, or maybe not even that. It was just absolutely pathetic. It's like, they're in Arizona, right, and it's all these evil blonde-haired parents are trying to, like some kind of Second Amendment comic, because Wade's insane. These evil blonde-haired and red-haired parents are trying to, I don't know, something to do with the Second Amendment, and the kids are acting like literal terrorists, but the kids are all POC, and the parents of the school are all blonde hair, and like, that's not what Arizona looks like. Arizona is like, it looks pretty much like Mexico, and in Mark Waid's world, he can't have Mexicans or blacks portrayed negatively. So he tells his story. It's like, yeah, none of this makes sense. Anyway, so what happens is woke people hire other woke people, and for the soy boys who occasionally on Twitter they ask for the definitions. As I use it here, it means people who perpetuate systems of anti-white oppression and intolerance, which, if you overrepresent Europeans in a negative role, that's the definition of racist propaganda. The thing is, things are too far gone now. The mainstream comic ship has sailed. They are fine with low sales. They would rather the company go out of business than portray pox people accurately, or portray the people of the light, people who look like you, accurately. And plot twist, it's mostly not in a negative role. You have to be fair to people, and the comics in the last 20 years have definitely not been fair. So you probably saw the video the other night of the Antifa kid who got deleted. He was like out after a wedding. He was with his girlfriend. She was wearing an evening dress. In his mind, the world is a certain way, but the world is not that way. So he got removed from that world. But in the minds of other left-wingers, the attacker is not responsible for his acts because the corrupt system made him that way. Actually, a bunch of left-wingers got deleted recently by their pets. It's kind of fun. In fact, the one guy who was interacting with the Dilbert Scott Adams guy had just his timeline on Twitter was just freaking fantastic because he was such a whack job left-winger. And he actually took seven hot loads to the chest. The thing is, these people really don't care. They're literally be more mad at you if you use a slur to describe the attackers than the act of the stabbing, because that's what brainwashing is. They don't care if comics go out of business. They will gladly kill it and move on to video games or something else, which is actually a great thing, because by putting the mainstream stuff out of business, it opens doors for manga and for Comicsgate. Marvel and DC were fine decades ago, but they could have been more based. They destroyed their own industry. I mean, I'm trying to say is like they were always left wing. It's just they weren't this bad. But as an adult, you go back and read this kind of stuff. You're like, yeah, this was it. Like if I was reading it fresh now, knowing what I know now, I couldn't get into comics because even comics from the '60s, '70s, and '80s still would have been too biased for me. But the thing is, there are alternative comics. There were alternative comics even back then, and nowadays there's much more with Comicsgate, obviously. The thing is, they just started their own industry to push this narrative from mildly left wing to insanely anti-white, anti-Christian, misandrist hatred, which didn't sell, as you keep reminding them, and they don't seem to click on that. So they lost the audience, and they lost that generational audience, and you got great old issues to read and the alternative independent comics that you can find now with Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Fund My Comic, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's like there's no reason to pick up something I don't know, some Captain America where all the bad guys are blonde-haired farmers in Idaho or something. And they're forming it's another Hugo Boss militia in Idaho. It's like, isn't that like every other comic in Marvel or DC is something to do with Trump or blonde people are starting some kind of militia and the Second Amendment and like these vague symbols. I don't know, it's like vaguely Norse ruin symbology and it's like, you can show non-white people in a negative light and they look at you like you're out of your friggin' mind if they think that. Anyway, so like, no, you're not passing on these comics to your kids. It'd be child abuse to like, Dad, this sucks. Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. I think it's just not worth whatever the $4 or $5 they're selling it for. And I think that's also out of whack also. Like if you match the comics to inflation, they should have been like under $3 for a paper comic, but anyway, I mean, manga seems to sell pretty well, and it's anyway. So a pretty simple video. They hired activists to push a narrative, and it didn't find an audience. It's sometimes the stuff really is that simple, and there's like they're seeing their pigeons come home to roost with comics and with movies, and literally with the physical activists. Well, like 4 of them just got deleted over the past month. And they were like cliche left-wing activists, and they also got delated by the folks that they were sticking up for. So the thing is, at no point did they attempt to turn this around. They are social justice warriors who are drinking the Kool-Aid. They think it's racist to portray non-whites accurately, but it's fine to focus all their hatred on the blonde people. I mean, that's what brainwashing is. And like, none of them want to actually have a conversation about it or like, they can't, without ad hominem deflection, straw man, they really don't have much left. Anyway, yeah, comic book stores are going to go out of business. So they're going to have to segue into board games or manga or something like that. Because you look at American comics, like, tell me which ones you think are great or a fun read or worth the $4. And it's like, yeah, they don't exist out there unless you're a far left-wing activist. And they go, okay, well then, why aren't these other aren't these POC kids buying these comics? The comics they're anti-white comics. They're geared for POCs and BLT kids. Why does that audience exist? It's like, well, they just don't know about them. We have to keep losing money until they find out about them. It's like you've passed the point of sustaining an industry. It's just going to it's going to stay alive just to keep the IP alive, and that's going to be about it. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, join the channel here over at Subscribestar. Send me a comic book, but nothing recent, because I think anything in the past 10, 20 years is probably pretty well crap. It's like even like you think back to 2000, it's like, yeah, that's probably 25 years comics have just not been not been great. And then you compare it to stuff the 25 years before that, and you're like, yeah, that seemed to have been the peak of comics. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, see you guys on the next episode.